Well, the overriding theme for the Chamber is what can be done to foster business and entrepreneurship in our community. Small business is so vital to the Oregon economy. It comprises 98% of Oregon firms and employers. So when problems arise, Ruth Miles is their champion. Ruth is the small business advocate for the state of Oregon. Ruth is no stranger to me. She is my neighbor, co-worker, dog sitter, house sitter, and we've done a lot of things together, but she's also no stranger to us. With her husband Mark, they live right here in Gresham, and she has experience operating a small business in East County as principal and owner of Crown Business Services, which provides administrative assistance to other small businesses. For the past 9 years, Ruth has worked in the Oregon Legislature in key staff positions for State Representative and Speaker of the House, Bruce Hanna. Since last January, she has traveled around the state assisting small businesses navigate and solve roadblocks in state government. Her office's mission is to bring together businesses and government to continuously improve Oregon's business climate. So she is truly from the government and here to help. So to speak to us today about what Oregon can do for you as a small business, please welcome Ruth Miles.
Thank you. This is kind of interesting for me. It's like coming home. I feel like a lot of what I learned about how to do business, I learned here. I learned in Gresham as a member of the chamber, as a member of the board who took me on as just a really green young woman and modeled me into somebody who has some business experience that I can now apply to help others. So this morning, rather than going on a retrospective of how much I love Gresham and how happy I am to be here, I would like to tell you a little bit about what I do. So this morning I want to tell you a story about Dave. So Dave and I, well Dave, let's start with him. Dave is a business owner in Tangent, Oregon. He and I first talked on January 8th, 2014, just 2 days after I opened this new Office of Small Business Assistance. And he was frustrated, man, he was really upset. He said, Ruth, I just want to teach people how to drive a truck and get them ready for their commercial driver's license. That's it. You see, the state requires that people like Dave who want to do this sort of training, this post-secondary training, have a license. And it's a pretty rigorous process. And so Dave had started that in March 2013. He learned that he needed a license, and then he took a few months to put together his business plan, all of his application materials, everything to supplement all the data they needed. And he got that into the private career school licensing unit in June 2013. So if you've done the math along with me so far, education sponsors, then you'll know that Dave had already been in the licensing process for 7 months by the time he and I talked on January 8th. And he was frustrated. It had taken him that entire 7 months to get to step 2 of the 8-step process for licensing a private career school in the state of Oregon. He had a lot to say about that, as you might imagine. He said, you know what, this has no discernible timeline, this process. He says, I have leased premises. I have students waiting to enroll, and I finally sent my trucks back out on the road so that I can make some money while I wait on this stupid school license. He was pretty frustrated. So I went to go visit with the folks at the private career school licensing unit, and you might be asking yourself about that. This is part of the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, and I was actually surprised to hear that the private career school licensing unit was actually a thing in state government. I've worked in state government for 9 years now, and I thought that I knew quite a bit about what sorts of agencies existed and what sorts of licensing was required, and I sure had never heard of this one. But I did the day I went in to visit with them. So I went in to go visit physically, and I'm glad that I did that. Often I've got to do a phone call because I work statewide, but it turned out to be a good idea because I walk in and I sit down at a little table with the lead employee for this office. And on the table as we sit down is this legal size accordion file, and it is bulging at the seams and overflowing onto the table. And I think, well, they didn't clean up before I came, fine, no big deal. So I say, what's this? And they say, well, that's Dave's file. And I say, really? So does that mean that you do no digital file keeping at all? And they say, no, 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 we do. We do digital file keeping, but we do that for people who already have a license to operate their school. For people like Dave, if we put him in our database, the public can see it. Because you see, their database plugs into a website, so if you want to find a clown school in Seaside or a trucking school in Tangent, you can go and search for such things, and if they exist, you can get a list of them, send your kid there, go there yourself, whatever you want to do. If they put Dave or people like him in that process, it looks like he already has a license. And so they found out, apparently, the hard way about that little problem. And so they were determined not to repeat it, to their credit. However, they just don't have the skills on board in their staff to create another database or to partition the one that they already have so that pieces of it are private. So unfortunately, what we end up with are these legal size accordion files. Even worse, there were 31 other schools in the pipeline waiting for their initial license when I walked in the door. And that was a pretty constant number over the months prior to me coming to this office. Pretty crazy stuff. I continue to ask questions of this employee about their workforce, their budget, how do they do things, and I found out about their budget. Interesting little piece of information. This is one of those little isolated units in state government that operates purely on a fee-for-service basis. It's a straight business case. It's kind of like if you're a dry cleaner and you take in a shirt to be cleaned and somebody's got to pay for that and then you return it to them. These guys take in 3 kinds of fees. Initial licensing fee, a renewal licensing fee where the state kind of periodically checks in to make sure things are still okay. And then they charge a $50 fee to certify cosmetology teachers. For free, they certify other kinds of teachers and they provide student transcripts, especially when a school has closed. Now those are important services. They're important to support the rest of their work. But you might ask, as I did, how's the math work on that when you only have fees coming in to pay for every paperclip, every body at a desk, all your overhead, all of those stupid legal size accordion files? That's all going to come from fees, and you're bleeding the value out of it. Well, that's what it turned out to be, is they're bleeding the value out of it. There's no secret cache of money, and there's certainly no additional budget support from this baby agency, Higher Education Coordinating Commission. So serious, serious problems here. One other thing about this office. There are 5 people in this office. They all work on different pieces of the process, different types of schools. So there's a cosmetology specialist, a curriculum specialist, a veterans benefits specialist. So those accordion files, 3 to 5 people have their fingers in there. And let me just stop for a second and talk a little bit about paper. I don't have a thing against paper at all. In fact, my husband, who is a wonderful guy and couldn't be here this morning, works on what I call the pile system. So if you go into his office, there are many, many piles of paper. Andre can testify to this. Piles of paper, and they're quite high. But if you ask Mark, hey, can you get me that document? He can usually find it, but God help us. If somebody else goes in there and moves a piece of paper, it screws the whole thing up. So I'm looking at this accordion file thinking about my husband and thinking there is no way this is functional. There is no possible way this is functional. One other thing about paper, when I first started working in the legislature part-time just to learn about the process so that I could protect my business, they were still using bill files. And so I don't know if some of you in the room may remember or have visited the legislature, where you go to a legislator's office and they had those big old file cabinets and the whole place used to be orange and green. It was a very odd sort of place to work. And every bill had its own file, and in that file was a bill, whether it's a couple of pages or thousands of pages. And we'd have every piece of correspondence in there. So I know how to make a filing system that several people are working on work. And I promise you, what I was seeing in this licensing office was not that. And just because I didn't make it doesn't mean it doesn't work, but it's clear this was just bad. And it was 32 of them. I mean, that's what really blew my mind about this. So it's clear they had some pretty serious problems. But it turned out Dave had serious problems too. When I walked into this office, one of the first things they said to me was, hey, we didn't know there was a problem with Dave because he hasn't been in touch with us for 3 months. And that did not come as a welcome surprise to me because I kind of wanted him to be perfect and them to be bad. And what I found out is that there are really 2 sides, and often more than that, to every story. So I called Dave when I got back to the office and I said, Dave, if you want to get through the process in a timely fashion, you must respond to their request for information or clarification in a timely fashion. They had been waiting for information from him. So he said, well, you know, Ruth, they ought to walk me through this process a little more than they do, and have you seen the correspondence they send out? So I took a look at that, pulling one of those pieces out of that big legal-size accordion file, and I found that the correspondence they were sending out, when they might ask for one or maybe two simple things like, you were filling out this form, you forgot this piece of information, we actually need that information. Or, change line 7, page 2 of your student handbook to read thusly, and then it will conform with statute. Just make that one word change. But instead of just saying that on the phone call, or sending that in a quick email, they'd send out a 1, maybe 2-page letter, full, single-spaced, legalese, cover your behind, don't sue us now, don't sue us ever, kind of language. And Dave, while he's really great at teaching people how to drive a truck, and he's got the vision to start this school, not so good at finding that piece of detail sort of mired among the legalese. So part of my coaching with Dave was to say, you know what, this is not a perfect world. You have got to get somebody on your team to figure this out with you. So go ahead, call the office if you get something and you don't understand what it is they need. Call them, be proactive, be the squeaky wheel. Call them up and just say, hey, it's Dave. What do you need from me today to get me through the process? Because that's what's going to make you get through this process quickly. So I said, you know, hire someone, get your wife to help, get your buddy, get your CPA, your attorney, whatever you do. So he hired his daughter. Very part-time. She doesn't have as much of a difficulty finding the detail that they're looking for and wading through all of that legalese. And she's become very much a partner with this licensing agency. So the whole process for her is a whole lot easier than it was for Dave. And I think for Dave, that was a huge learning experience. But he fixed the problem immediately. As soon as I brought it to his attention, he fixed it. And so I have to commend him for that. I mean, he's a humble guy, and he just wants to make this work. So when I engage in advocacy like this for folks like Dave, I issue findings from my office. And what those findings have is it's a report format, and it contains an objective description of the problem. Not just what Dave says, not just what the private career school licensing unit or HEC says, but what an objective third party who's not part of the executive branch says about this problem. Any contextual information or history about the problem that has some bearing on what it is that we're talking about. The things that I did to advocate for this business, you know, who did I visit with? Who are they with and what's their position? What kinds of documents was I looking for from them? And then my recommendations for the agency and for the business. So we've already talked about my recommendations for Dave. For him, it was to hire a detail person, to be proactive with the office. And those were in the report. And if you want to see a copy of the report, I actually have a couple with me. These are public record. So you can see any of them that you would like at any time you would like. So for the licensing unit, recommendations for them, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Take a look at your fee schedule. Consider whether or not it covers the cost of doing licensing in a timely fashion. Make sure that you can fund a small, simple, straightforward technology upgrade so that you can do digital case management, and so you can automate pieces of your process where it makes sense. Let me talk really quickly about automating pieces of their process. This was actually an idea that their staff came up with. I thought it was brilliant. They spend a lot of time sitting at that correspondence that Dave complained about, and they spend a lot of money doing that. And they don't have time and they don't have money, because we all know time is money. So for those guys, it's not really a good system. If they could take pieces of their process, forms that they already have existing through their 8-step process, and require that certain fields be filled out before you can click submit on that form, then they would really be able to maximize their little 5-person staff, I think. So interesting about this, you know, if you go order flowers for your spouse on Valentine's Day, they do this exact same thing, except they have a much greater level of financial security than these folks would need. So if I want to order flowers for my husband from Nancy's, then, you know, I find the arrangement I want. I give him my name, his name, the delivery address, my credit card number, and security code. And if I don't do those things, then they're not going to let me click submit. They will let me slide on the nice note to my husband, but they are not going to let me slide on giving him a credit card number. So this is not technology that doesn't exist. It's not rocket science. Probably one of you here has a competent fifth grader that could do this kind of thing, or even create another database for them, but they just don't have the skills on board in their office. They're good at curriculum stuff. They're good at dealing with veterans benefits and the federal government and that interface, but they're not good at technology. So what they need is a change so that they have something other than Stone Age tools to do the job they do, so that they can do it in a timely fashion and really serve their customers, not just students of these schools, but the small businesses that run them. So a couple weeks after the final report goes out, I get a call, and it's from the new manager of the licensing unit. And he says, "I've read your report, I want to talk with you." And my heart sinks. And I'm thinking, oh crap, this is going to be bad. He's going to say, if I was here, it would have been a different story. If I was here, we would have had something to say about your report. Excuse me. But I go in and I meet with him anyway, and he introduces himself. His name is Juan Baez Arevalo, and Juan is fabulous. Juan says, "Hey, I'm so glad you wrote the report, because you've given me the momentum I need to change the way we do business in this office. It's been too long the same way, too long without stepping back and taking just a minute to say, is there a way we can do this better? Is there a way to streamline this process? Are we doing the best job that we can do for the people of Oregon for the money that they're giving us?" So he's thrilled, and he points to another stack of paper on his desk, and he says, "These are all of the Oregon revised statutes and all of the Oregon administrative rules that pertain to licensing in this office." He says, "Nowhere in there does it say we have to do this in 8 steps. Nowhere. You know, you go back to Dave and tell him, send everything, send all 8 steps. Don't wait for us to tell you it's okay now. You can send us your information about premises," which he's had for months. Just let him send it all. We want to get him licensed. So very impressive new manager. And I have to say, one of the reasons I think he's a good hire for this office is that he has a background in small business as well as academia. He's also done some policy work. And so for me, that's kind of the perfect mix of someone you want to have stand in the gap between a business and doing this kind of post-secondary training. So a couple weeks after that, I get an email from Dave, and Dave says, "I'm going to go meet with Juan, the new manager of the unit, and here are the ideas I want to present to him. I'd like to have your take on those." So I take a look at what he's got listed out there, and I am super impressed. And I sent back a note that says that, because here's the deal. What Dave was proposing was 4 or 5 simple things, all very grounded in common sense, good business practices, but they would not remove any of the rigor from the process. This process is rigorous among Western states. I've heard a joke that in Idaho, if you want to have a private career school, they have a guy with an approved stamp, and you pay him and he approves you. This process is not like that. It's meant to protect students and the families that are paying for this kind of post-secondary training. It's meant to make sure that when a family or a student ponies up the money for tuition, that they are getting the training that they signed up for, that there's no inflated claims about, you know, if you go to school here for 2 weeks, you're going to get a job that pays $100,000 a year. Doesn't happen that way. We all know that. We want to make sure that a student who's young, who still hasn't had a lot of life to gather wisdom from, doesn't be, you know, the victim of that kind of circumstance. So Dave goes and he meets with Juan, and he presents these suggestions, and they have started to implement those suggestions. It's a fabulous thing. So for my office, my goals are pretty simple. First, job 1, solve the problem for the business. Identify those systemic issues that are causing the same stupid thing to happen over and over again to Oregon businesses, and report back. And when I say report back, I don't mean just to the Secretary of State, or just to the legislature, or just to the governor, or the affected businesses and agencies. I mean report back to you guys. While I'm doing all this, I want to raise the level of customer service at the state level. Because what I find with state employees is that they are well-meaning and usually pretty good at their jobs, but they have a lack of understanding that every minute that you spend in a transaction with them is a minute you are not making payroll. You are not creating jobs, you're not growing your business, and you're certainly not moving the economy forward the way small business does in Oregon. They just don't understand that equation. So I'm on an awareness raising campaign here. And after running a small business for decades, I can tell you that it's important for me that I raise the level of customer service among public agencies, because when you are the only game in town, you had damn well better be the very best at what you do. So, I mean, if you go to your dry cleaner and they don't do a good job on that shirt, you can go to another dry cleaner down the street who maybe charges more but gets it done and does it right. Dave didn't have that option. Dave said, you know, I'd pay, instead of the $1,500 I paid for this licensing fee, I'd pay $5,000, $7,000, $10,000 if they could just get the thing done in a couple of months. I would have saved so much money just on lease payments. So, quick note about reporting back. One of the things that I noticed as a legislative staffer is that among all 90 legislators and their staff that are working on constituent casework that is similar to this, so when I say that, I mean when you get frustrated with something as a business and you call your legislator and say, hey, I need help with this, or as an individual citizen, you call and you say, hey, I've got a problem, you know, whether it's health insurance or whatever it is. They're all working on that kind of casework. And when I was in the legislature working for Speaker Hanna, that was part of my book of business, was to work on constituent casework. And there is no enterprise system to gather the metadata from that. Every legislator keeps records, and many of them in a slightly different way, and there's a varying degree of detail. But the big things that you need to know that legislators could really use are, you know, like, who are the agencies that we're getting the most complaints about? What are the complaints that we're getting? Are they responsive to an inquiry from a legislator? What are the kinds of solutions that are working? We're not seeing any of those trends, and that's never been the case. So you only know, as a legislator or a staffer, anecdotally, who the big problem areas are in the executive branch. And you only know anecdotally who's going to be the best at solving them, or what's actually going to work in terms of a solution. So when we opened this office, one of my top priorities is to make sure that we didn't repeat that mistake. So I've asked legislators, I've met with 52 of them now, and I've asked them to send me their small business casework so that I can get my arms around that data. And so I can come back to them and say, these are the agencies that I have had inquiries about. These are the kinds of problems that I am seeing. These are the agencies that have been responsive, and these are the ones that have not. These solutions work, and these don't. To me, that's data that you can use, and not just data that you can use as a legislator for policy or budget decisions, or as a governor for administering the executive branch. But you guys, so that you know as you're moving forward with your business, hey, if you're going to try and license a private career school, it could have been a cautionary tale that I was going to tell you, but instead, I think it's a tale of positive change. I think we're going to see that 32 number go down, and I think we're going to see their processing time for new licensees go way down as time goes by. It's going to take them a little time to make all the changes that I've asked them to make, but I think that they're going to do it. So, I have a big ask here. And my ask is this: you may not have a problem with state government right now, and you may never have a problem with state government, but I guarantee all of you will know someone who does, whether it's your friend, someone you know from church, even a competitor, a colleague. And when that happens, I want you to have them call me, because if you need to cut red tape in Oregon, I am your gal, because I run with scissors. So really quickly, closing up, I want to let you know that I got an email from Dave on May 21st, and he's licensed. School's in session. So that's my talk, but I'd love to hear from you. What are your conversations, or what are your questions, and what are your concerns and questions about the office? Just jump right out there.
We don't have a roving mic this morning, so just speak up.
I'm in the building development business, so I don't necessarily deal a lot with the state, but a lot of different departments and jurisdictions. And I think you hit on the common roadblock for me in terms of losing time is it's all related to risk and the inability to measure and make a decision about risk at the bureaucratic level. And you said that letter went out with all the legalese. Everyone's trying to cover their rear end. And so I may get into a department and you know, the first 5 people I work with all say, no, you can't do that, no, you can't do it. You finally get to the guy who heads the department, he looks at it in 2 seconds and says, oh, no, that's not a problem, we'll do that. But you have to march through, there's this risk factor that needs to be addressed. And, you know, I mean, state government and all these bureaucracies, there is an element of risk, but you got to weigh that against the efficiency of moving the process forward. And I don't know, you know, how to educate towards that.
So the comment and question was about mitigating risk in state government and sort of the bureaucraties that you run into when you're working with a state agency. And I can tell you, I have the same problem. I am a bureaucrat. I hate to say it that way, but when it comes down to it, I am. And when I'm calling someone else who works for an executive branch agency and saying, hey, in fact, I have a case right now that I'm working on for a farmer, and I've called the particular program that I'm trying to deal with and trying to get them to think outside of the box for me, to see if we look at every single side of this, is there any possible way to make this happen for this person? And they don't think that way. They think in terms of, in fact, most of the people that I've come in contact with think, if this is the question you asked, there is an answer to it, and it's black and white. There is no gray, and there is no thinking outside of the box. There's no innovation. And you usually do find that kind of up the scale, up the pay scale. But here's the thing. For my office, I'm trying to hit the problem where it lives. So what I do, which is a lot different from doing legislative casework, is I go straight to the frontline workers and their managers. I'm dealing with those folks. I'm not calling the head of the agency to say, this is Ruth, I'm the small business advocate, I've got a problem with your agency that a business has brought to my attention. It's not that. I'm going to the people on the front line and I'm having to explain what it is I do, where my office is, what my powers are, what they're not, and make sure that they know they've got to work with me. Statutorily, they have to have the conversation. But I often find that I'll get sort of black and white answers with no sort of innovative thinking from those frontline workers, not always, but often, and then I have to go up the food chain when I get to the recommendation stage. Or if I just can't move forward, if I can't move the ball forward, then I just move up the food chain till I can. So that is a common problem, and I'll tell you this, it's a common problem that I hear from businesses who contact my office for help. But the goal of the office is to keep you from having to spend all of that time doing a transaction with the state, particularly if it's a complex one. So when you run into an issue where you know that the communication is not happening, it's kind of going over each other's head, or it's just you're not meeting in the middle where you ought to be, that's a good time to call me. You know, God bless the attorneys in the room, but call me before you call your attorney. Call me before you walk over to the wall and start hitting your head against it, because those are the things that I can help with, and I can spend the time so that you don't have to do it. So Sue has mentioned that she's been certified as a woman-owned business by Business Oregon, and they're certified, we call it the OMWESB office, OMWESB. And now trying to get that certification back is just a huge pain, and trying to keep the certification is a huge pain. And I will tell you, I had that certification for my business, and I also found that it was far too much of a pain, too much time intensive for me to keep it, and I wasn't getting a ton of business from it. Now that's different for you. So Sue, in your industry, you might get more business from that, but I'll tell you, I have 2 active cases with the OMWESB office right now. I've had 2 other complaints, all from women-owned businesses. I haven't had any complaints from minority-owned businesses, and it's not because I don't spend an awful lot of time with the minority business community, particularly here in the Portland metro area. I'm not seeing them have problems with licensing. I am seeing women-owned businesses repeatedly challenged, particularly if they are in a technical field, if they do engineering, if they do anything like that. And to the extent that one business owner said to me, they said that because I had men on my payroll, that I am not in charge of my shop. Another woman said to me, they said, because I personally do not provide the actual service that I oversee my company providing, because I personally don't go out and do this, that I can't be certified. It is ridiculous, and it's a problem that I'm seeing over and over and over again. In fact, I will probably be testifying about that before a procurement task force for DAS soon. So I would love to talk with you more about that, because I need to have as much background information as I can, and I'm going to ask them to walk me through the whole systems again, because they have changed the rules quite a bit since I was first certified. So it's a lot more difficult now than it used to be. Questions? Other questions, sir?
So I recently, I'm one of those attorneys.
You're forgiven. It's okay.
So, I wasn't sure how much I wanted. But part of my practice is working with real estate and land use and that kind of thing. So I have the gracious opportunities to deal primarily with county governments on issues. And I had the first good experience recently in Clackamas County, where I went with the senior planner on a zone change application and a conditional use permit application. And his first statements with me when we sat down to do a pre-planning conference was, my job is to get to yes. And I thought, holy smokes, where did this come from?
I think I know that guy.
And I think that that's the mindset that needs to be far more pervasive in government. Because the mindset is just the opposite, at least in my limited experience. And as you were relating the story about Dave, I wondered why the technology people at government had not already been contacted by them to provide the kind of technology upgrade, because the state of Oregon is supposed to have this great technology department. It's supposed to be providing tech services and IT services to all these agencies.
So, question about Oregon IT projects and technology. Kind of a sore spot right now, but I will tell you that a couple of years ago, before the creation of the Higher Education Coordinating Commission and before the licensing unit was moved from their prior home in Oregon Department of Education to the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, this couldn't possibly be harder to say, it's just too many words, but they did ask for a technology upgrade. They asked for a quote on that. And what they got back was a quote. I think they probably put out an RFP. And what they got back was from Oracle, just one response. And it was a $30,000 price tag to redo their database. And that was right after they found out that when they put someone in their database who was not already licensed, that they were going to show up on the web. Also, just a simple technology issue. And there's an interesting postscript to that as well. But they didn't take that, and I'm kind of glad they didn't, because I don't think they need to spend $30,000 on new software. They don't have to have a custom created thing. They can use off-the-shelf software and customize it for their uses if they need to. But you know, I'm using Salesforce to do case management. It's not the perfect thing, but it works really well, and it's a commercial tool. We haven't had to do a lot of customization. It works just great. And I'm going to be able to pull those reports not just on a daily basis, but on a monthly, yearly, you know, every 5 years basis, so that you can start to see those trend lines that are important. But those guys have put out an RFP. I talked to one last week, and he said that they've got an RFP out right now for a technology upgrade, and I'm going to be staying in touch with him about what the amount is. And then just a little word on technology projects for the state of Oregon. This is an area of contention right now because of the whole Cover Oregon thing, and I will tell you that as much as it might seem like it's organized from the outside, from the inside it feels less that way. And that could be because I am not working for an executive branch agency. The Secretary of State is her own constitutional office. We're separate. So our IT systems seem to work quite well. We did have an intrusion in February. It was an international hacking group that got in touch, you know, got into the systems, but they certainly didn't get any financial data. Those are separate protected systems, and they were able to fix the problem and put those things back up. It was a pretty straightforward kind of thing. It was an emergency for the agency, but it was a pretty straightforward kind of fix. The state of Oregon has more complex needs. As you might imagine, they change from agency to agency and from office to office. So trying to see to all those needs in some sort of coordinated, consistent fashion is very difficult. So I think there's a lot of work to make that happen. In fact, the CIO for the Secretary of State just moved to be the CIO of DAS, or to move into their team, so that they could start this process of making sure that we have a consistent security policy for all of our technology and start to address issues like they're having in this private career school licensing unit. Allison's asking about the powers of this office. So this office was legislatively created in 2013, and the legislature in their wisdom saw fit to grant me a couple of broad powers. The first is to compel agencies to work with me to solve a problem for a business, and I might add for the agency as well. The second broad power that I have is to protect the businesses that come to me for assistance. So they're not going to get blowback from an agency out of frustration that they have to work with somebody like me who's going to demand results and demand accountability. That said, I don't have the ability to enforce my recommendations. I can't require an executive branch agency to do what I say because I'm not part of the executive branch, and I certainly am not in a supervisory role over those agencies. However, the fix for that is making everything public. So, like I said, when I do this kind of advocacy, as opposed to kind of simple, quick questions or policy questions that really don't need advocacy, just information, I issue findings, and this is actually a copy of Dave's report. If you want to see it, I have a few up here. And these reports go out to the Secretary of State, the affected business, the agency, to several people within the Secretary of State. They also go to the legislators who see this person's district. So Dave, in this case, was in Senator Close's district. Senator Close got a copy of this. She knew about the process when I was advocating for Dave so that she was up to speed on what was going on. So these are public, and they go to legislators who want to keep up with the activities of these office. And I'll tell you, I hand out a ton of these things around the state as I speak to groups just like yours, or attend meetings, or sit on panels. People are always interested to see, you know, kind of what's happening with these sort of things. Because it's not just the report, it's what happens after the report. So all of this stuff is public. The other thing, I talked really briefly about reporting back. I will issue an annual report from my office probably in about February 2015, assuming everything goes perfectly and there are no hiccups with printing. But that will show you the kinds of trends that I've seen over the past year, what kinds of agencies I've worked with, and what kinds of problems I see. So it's not just about telling the story of the Daves of this world, it's also about making sure that there's hard data to support that, because I think that's actionable data that legislators need, it's actionable data that the governor needs, and certainly the Secretary of State, I think, finds that helpful. You all know that the Secretary, as part of her book of business, has audits. And while she doesn't directly recommend a specific agency to be audited, she does have input. And I promise you that these reports do inform that process. Okay, so the question from Dan is, are you seeing any trends thus far, this soon in the process? And it's pretty thin, but I'll tell you two things come to mind. First of all, the agency that I have seen the biggest problems with, it would be the OMWSB office, the office that certifies women, emerging small businesses, and minority-owned businesses. 2 active cases right now, 2 pending complaints. I expect another active case soon. So even though I may close some of those down, it's probably going to be a while, because I want to make sure that those reports actually detail what the problems are that Sue mentioned. So that would be the office that I'm seeing the most from. So you know, I hate to say it, but it would be Business Oregon in this case, would be the agency that's the problem. It's just that piece of it, though. And then what kinds of problems I'm seeing is kind of a different thing. I'm seeing a lot of folks that are saying either I have a contract with the state, I'm not getting paid, or they're not administering the contract appropriately, or I need a license and it's taking for bloody ever to get it. I'm on the 2nd case now for an office that, this acronym is even worse than on WSB. It is the HRQI office, which stands for Healthcare Regulation and Quality Improvement. So there you go. Everybody learned something new today. The HRQI office is located in Portland, and they do all kinds of licensing for healthcare related facilities, dialysis centers, home healthcare agencies, and in-home care agencies, all kinds of things. I am on the 2nd case for an in-home care agency who is seeking their first license. In this case, the one that's current right now, they have been in the licensing process for 10 months now, and they are waiting for what is called a survey date, when the HRQI staff will review their policies and procedures to make sure that everything is in place the way it ought to be, so that they can protect this very vulnerable population of elderly folks that need assistance in their homes. But waiting 10 months for this is ridiculous. The first case that I had with them, the gal who was starting the agency had waited 7 months, and then she finally, out of frustration, wrote her legislators, and one of her legislators, Senator Mark Haas, sent the case to me so that it could be advocated, and we got her the license. Got her a survey date within a month. So there's definitely good outcomes from the office, but those are the kinds of problems I'm seeing, particularly licensure. So the question is, how can business owners more effectively deal with state government? I guess is maybe the way I can paraphrase that. And I would tell you, I run into in my travels across the state a huge range in the sophistication and experience level of businesses. Businesses, you know, starting a business is sort of like having a child. There is no test that you have to take. And while I never got to be a parent of anything other than a couple of wonderful foster girls, I did start a business, and I had no experience whatsoever. And the Sues of this world and other folks that were a part of the chamber at the time I was a member and involved really taught me a lot about how to do business. And in fact, some of those friendships have turned into lifetime friendships, and I continue to reap the value of those mentorships. So I would say, to the extent that you can, be prepared. Read everything 5 times. And so, because many of the problems I run into are because somebody hasn't read something. I get a lot of inquiries in my office from people who are starting a business, and they know the thing that they are good at doing, whether it's cheese making or, I don't know, creating paper mache. But they know that, and they sort of in a hazy way understand that there has to be a structure that supports that if they're going to succeed. But they don't usually understand the extent to which that structure must be absolutely robust and over which they need to exercise very high oversight and enforcement over their own business. And so I spend a lot of time saying, okay, here are some beginning steps, but you need to go to a small business development center and spend some time doing some training. You know, if you don't have your MBA, do that. You don't necessarily need an MBA to do your business, but you definitely need training and support. Find a cohort group and get involved with them. And if you need access to capital, think about that before you start getting into debt. I get a lot of calls from people who say, I need a loan, I want a grant, I need this, that, the other thing. And I was very fortunate in my business that I didn't have to go into debt in order to do business. And it was just my particular situation. I'm so thankful for that now, because I see an awful lot of businesses that are in capital intensive industries that go into debt first minute they're in business, and it is problematic for them to pay that down if they don't find the success they're looking for. Dave, for instance, was one of those folks that really wasn't as prepared as he could have been. Dave's business plan, he told me the first day we talked, says he's going to make $250,000 during his first year in operation. He's going to graduate an average of 4 students a month, and he's going to hire 2 full-time teachers by the end of the year in the first year of business. And I said, Dave, you know, I've been in business myself, and I am positive you are not going to make $250,000 no matter how good a teacher you are and how great your school is. And he said, fine, you make that number, you know, what you want it to be, cut it down to a number that you feel comfortable with. But he said, you know, add me to the 31 other schools in the pipeline, you'll see there's a huge economic stop here. All of these businesses are not getting through. So be prepared is what I would definitely say. And just to clarify, there's a very fine line that I walk in this office of not being your business lobbyist, because I can't lobby, I can educate, and I can advocate among the executive branch agencies and reveal my findings to the legislature. But and certainly policy that arises out of the cases that I work on, and there may be some coming up, that's the kind of thing that the Secretary of State would introduce as part of her package of bills. So so that I'm not in a position, you know, I'll go and testify and I will educate, but I am not going to lobby on those things. In fact, let me just quickly tell you about some of the other kinds of calls that come into my office, not just those folks that are starting a business or those folks that have a really complex problem. I get these sort of in-between calls, I call them, and they're really looking for information. They want to know how a law or an administrative rule affects their business on a practical level. In fact, I got a call from a realtor about 2 months ago, and he said, I need to understand the whole chain of enforcement for carbon monoxide alarms. Who enforces that? You know, when am I supposed to tell my buyers and sellers that they need to look for that? And he was not getting any kind of response from the state fire marshal's office. And so I was able to get him the information he needed. And what I found out is that the law, as it's written written right now does not require your carbon monoxide alarm to actually be functional. It just has to be there. Interesting little piece of information. And so here's the thing, I'm not going to go charging into the legislature and try and change that. But this guy has the information he needs if he wants to pursue some sort of policy goal. And here's the thing, maybe he's happy with the law as it is, and so I'm not going to upset that apple cart. But he just needed to be equipped with information so that he knew how to run his business and how to advise his buyers and sellers in the best way possible.
And I think to go along with that, I give the department credit because they're willing to work with us and they realize that something needs to be changed. So there is no adversarial position with us. So I just want to know how we can help them basically to limit and lower our load.
Right. Well, let me make some, I'll talk with you afterwards and make some calls and see if we can get you connected with the right person. I don't think that they were thinking of somebody like me with these sorts of qualifications when they opened up the hiring for this job. And I just happened to be starting to look around for the next opportunity when I saw this. And I interviewed for it, and there was a pretty amazing group of people that interviewed. And in fact, I didn't get hired. They hired somebody else for this job. She worked for a week and a half and then left for her dream job at the Port of Portland. So she is happy doing the job that she really wants to do. And then I was number 2 on the list, and they called me, and in I came, and we opened the office up, and I have not stopped since. So I think that this is one of those things that was had to be in God's timing. And it happened the way it was supposed to happen, because they certainly were not looking among legislative staff or people with legislative experience to do this kind of job. And I don't think it had occurred to them the importance of having somebody who had a lot of experience doing casework and that sort of organizational thinking, and then also be able to know, you know, how you need to communicate what happens out of the activities of this office. You know, how can you communicate effectively those trend lines, those stories that are important, and the underlying data. So thank you very much. That's a huge compliment. Thank you for your time today. I really do to call if anything comes up, even if you don't think it's something I can help with, because I literally am much more available to you guys because I just live over the hill right by Andre. So I would like very much, I haven't had casework from this area, which is, you know, both a blessing and a curse, but if there's anything that I can do for you, I am here to help. Thank you.